Hey, everybody, this is Peter, and I just wanted to say that this episode is a little bit different than my first two. We actually follow a murder. Just kidding. Today's episode is Paul Granger, and Paul has been doing full-time volunteer ministry since 2018. And when I say volunteer, I mean that there's no paycheck. He has a family, he has a house, he has bills, and he doesn't get paid. He's volunteer. He trusts in the Lord. And so naturally, my first question was, how does that actually work? And his answer is incredible, that the Lord truly does provide for him. And so we hear a little bit about that. We also get into a story from one of my trips to Brazil, where we were hiding up this creek from the Brazilian Navy. And what was waiting for us when we stopped is just one of those things that I still think about pretty much on a weekly basis. And so I just wanted to say that this episode goes deeper into faith and theology than the episodes with Caleb and Ryan. But I think that even if it's not normally your thing to just listen to a podcast about faith, I think that Paul's story is really going to make you think. And I think that if it is your thing, you're going to hopefully love it, because I really enjoyed my conversation with him. And so, thanks for listening. And thanks to Nairobi. You guys are still out there listening. I see you. I see the stats. And, all right.
At least it'll be a good story.
Today I'm joined with Paul Granger. And Paul has a very unique aspect, or unique vision, I guess, in life. And as soon as I kind of read what he was doing and what he was about, I thought, okay, I want to get this guy on and hear a little bit more about him. And so, Paul, thanks for joining us. And why don't you go ahead and just kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, well, thank you for making space. I'm going to give you and your listeners a heads up. I had an awful night of sleep. So you might even hear it in my voice. People have heard my voice before, would be like, oh, what's going on with Paul? I have a giant cup of coffee with me, like a huge mug. However, caffeine actually sometimes makes me tired, so this may be a bad idea. We'll find out. But
if you fall asleep, we'll just keep going.
Maybe I'll talk in my sleep, and maybe it'll be like your best show ever.
You never know. You never
know. So it is a tricky thing introducing myself, especially depending on the context. But the easiest way for the broadest audience is I live a very untraditional life. I have been doing full-time volunteer ministry since basically 2018. In other words, I haven't received a traditional paycheck since 2018. And what that looks like is nothing like what a traditional role should look like. Because normally you have your job description and you have your tasks or your projects, you have a set schedule. None of that. There have been projects that I've had, but on any given day it could shift. There are specific spaces that I will be, but on any given day, I might find myself somewhere else. And the core of what I feel invited to do is to cultivate authentic, accessible space just to process this thing we call life. Now, for me, a lot of who I am and what I do is driven by being a Christ follower. I am striving to make myself available on any given day to love God and love others. And I love it, but some days I'm like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Or this is not what I'm supposed to have going on. But every day ends with a clear awareness that God knows more than I do. And if I'm willing to just trust that knowledge over my own, I could end up going places that I wouldn't have been able to get to or even thought about.
Man, what a special vision. And I think that, I guess how in the world did you land there? And you also have a family, right? So
I have a family.
Yeah, so
no paychecks.
Yeah, how did you land to that point? Especially, how did that first conversation with your wife go, where you're like, I think I'm just going to be a volunteer, a life of volunteer, in the name of Jesus.
Yeah. Well, that started, how many years ago now? Almost 30 years ago. When I was in middle school, I'd grown up going to church. I'd always just known God was God.
Where'd you grow up?
I'm a Christian, and everyone. Just outside of Metro Richmond, in Hanover County.
Okay.
It's For those that don't know it, it's a big rural county. I lived on 10 acres, most of it woods. And it was an environment that most people identified as Christian. But when I got to middle school, I started to really process that. What does that actually mean? Like, what does it mean for me to say I'm a Christian? What does it mean for me to say that God exists? Like, is it something that is just a cultural belief, or is it something that maybe should impact my life? Like, if I'm saying that I'm a Christian, if I'm saying God's real, shouldn't that mean something for how I live and how I think and what I do? Deep thoughts for like a 12, 13-year-old.
I remember being in college and people, a lot of people who weren't Christians but would see us as Christians, or me and my friends, well, why don't you believe in Jesus? Why don't you believe in God? A lot of times they'd say, because you guys don't live any different than us. And I think that for me, that really, I don't want to say it was convicting, because I wouldn't say it was necessarily convicting, but I was like, okay, if they're viewing me as not living differently or not believing in this entity, because I feel as if I'm giving Jesus my whole life, of course I believe in God. I pray before bed, anything like that. And so, I just remember that question. So for you to have that in middle school, like reflecting on that question, be like, okay, well, how do I actually live this out? That's special. That's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I can look back now and realize that was from outside me, because I was not having any other deep thoughts like that. There was nothing that prompted it. But it did change my life, and not in the stereotypical testimony kind of way of like, I left my life of, drugs and murdering people. No, like, a lot of that took place in traditional ministry roles. Most of my jobs have been in ministry. Most of my jobs have provided paychecks. But my last traditional paying job, it was a very hard journey. It became a toxic work environment. A lot of unjust things happened, and I ended up having my job taken without any reason given.
Was that in a ministry?
But in the midst of that, it was in a ministry.
Yeah,
so you would think.
Yeah.
You would think. And I began to wrestle in that space during and then after with this reality of kind of what you named on an individual level. I was doing my job really well. I was really good at what I did. The chair of the board even said, this is the right person for the job. And then that job's taken and I'm unemployed. And as a father, a husband, a homeowner, someone who has a phone bill, right? Like, the world would say, human logic would say, you got to get a job as soon as possible.
Right.
That's not what God said. Like, I felt this sense from God. And for those who aren't believers, I just want to name, sometimes us Christians will just kind of throw that language around, like, God said this, God said that. We could have a whole podcast diving into that. When I say that, I do not mean an audible voice. It's actually really hard to explain. The best I can say is like a deep sense that seems both within me and outside of me. And I've come to learn, like, even when I feel like something is God, I have to remain humble, because at any point I could learn, oh, that was actually me and not God, or that was God, but then I put my own interpretation and spin on it. So humility has to be a continued part.
Absolutely.
So what I felt like God was saying was, one, to not operate out of financial fear, to not make decisions because I need money. Because what he was trying to communicate to me was, I don't need money, I need him. Do I still have bills? Yeah. Could he address that in a creative way? Well, if he created all of creation, probably. And so I didn't need to rush into a job because I needed money. And the second thing I felt like he was saying was to not job hunt for the first 2 months. And I actually had someone like 20 years younger than me rebuke me in public because she's like, you have kids, you have a house. It was very interesting. I don't blame her. But the sense was so clear. And I think sometimes too, if it's from God, oftentimes it carries with it a peace, as scripture puts it, a peace that defies understanding. Like a peace that does not make sense, should not be there. And yet you're like, I don't know, I feel good about this.
Yeah.
And so that entered this season of unemployment. And there was a month of that I made like a little mini sabbatical, and it was amazing. And what I didn't know then that I know now is actually ministry started like even before I left my job. Like the way that I am living ministry now began the way I was connecting with people. The podcast started in that space. I didn't want to start a podcast, but there it was. And then there was a point where I felt like God was giving me a piece to begin job hunting, but to not job hunt so that I would get a job, which didn't make sense at the time. But I began to apply for these things that it seemed like God had like teed it up for me to get it. It seemed like it was going to be a great opportunity. And one after one, there were simultaneously things that seemed like supernatural, like God's doing something, and it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But what I began to find out is it was almost like God was saying, look, I could give you this job that pays like twice as much as you've ever made and is like a third of the work that you were doing in your last job. I could do that. I wanted you to see that I could, but I'm not going to because I'm going to do something different. Where it all finally led is the spring of 2019. Our money should have ran out long before, miraculously didn't. Some of that was unsolicited checks that showed up in the mail. Some of it, we don't even know how it didn't run out.
Yeah.
And this was with me. I ended up in the hospital. We had a baby in that time. Like our cat had to have dental surgery, like huge expenses, and yet the money didn't run out. So God's like set this framework up that something supernatural is happening. And if God is real and God exists, he's the one behind it. So that when I had these opportunities, one that paid well, would be a respectable job. One of them that would put me in more of a leadership position so that, maybe those that questioned me would realize, oh, we were wrong about him. And then there was this one. There's this one with Youth with a Mission. Youth with a Mission has been going since the early 60s, is not just all over the United States, but all over the world. And the core of it is this positioning to be willing to, as they put it, know God and make him known, but to push it more really to love God and love others. It takes different forms in different places. Sometimes it's executed well, sometimes not, as people do in any spaces. But in this particular body of people, I met a man named Chris Zinchuk, who was directing the YWAM location in Virginia, and he is one of the most authentic, loving people I've ever met. Sacrificially loving, let me name that. Not just nice to people, but he really does want the best for people, even if it costs him. And he met me, we met before, but he met me in that hard space of job loss, particularly unfair job loss. And even though we had known each other, we had never really had a conversation, but we began meeting. And as we come into 2019, he was like, Paul, I wanted to talk to you about something because I've been praying and I feel like God has been putting you on my mind and inviting me to see if you would want to come be a part of what we're doing here. Now, I'd been doing all kinds of job searches, interviews, so I know how this normally goes. I have to figure out what is the role, what are the responsibilities, and will that mesh with who I feel like God's invited me to be?
Right.
And he's like, no. I'm not bringing you in because we have a gap to fill. Like, I know who you are. I know how you operate. And I feel like that would be a really great fit in what's happening here. And your job would be whatever God tells you to do. I'm like, man, so this is like best case scenario. Someone who respects me because I'd been disrespected for so long. Someone who knows me and values what I bring to the table. And my job would be like serving God as God invites me.
In
I could
ministry,
continue
yeah.
to do the podcast. I could write. Yeah. The caveat is no paycheck. So this brings us back to the question. How does someone who, at the time is almost in his 40s with a family and a house step into that? My wife, she's known me for a while, and she's known that I have been called to this life of ministry. Not called to doing ministry, but that my life is one shaped around, all right, how has God invited me to serve? She knows I want to be willing to serve God, however, even if it's hard. And so she was not surprised by it. And to her credit, she knew what that reality would mean, but I guess God gave her a piece as well around it. And so she's like, yeah, all right, we'll figure it out. We'll make it work.
So is that fundraising based?
Oh no, that's actually a good question. Cause if you're asking it, your listeners are asking it too. How does that work?
Yeah.
If he gets no paycheck, there's no money. So, okay. It's a complicated question to answer because there is the easy way and the assumed way, which is, Yeah. Like anybody who's ministry that's not getting a paycheck, they raise support.
Right.
That is a thing that happens. However, that's something else that God had done leading up to this. I'd done fundraising in a lot of my vocational roles.
Yep.
I had raised support in many, many times. And I felt like I was saying, hey, I just want to remind you, I do not want you to operate out of financial fear. If you are inviting people into something like this, you are not inviting them because you need money. Because if you start doing that, then you're just treating them as money bags. You're just treating them as sources of, like, I need you to understand what you're actually inviting them to.
Yeah.
You're inviting them to join you on the journey. But God in his creativity, a God who is, I've come to believe is actually a provider, has continued to provide in really creative ways. Some of it is unexpected gifts. Some of it is unexpected blessings, like the house that I'm in the past, in that time, $100,000 worth of work, more than that, has been put into this house that we didn't have to pay for, like maybe $80.
How?
One time for
I want that.
through programs, through grants, through things like, and I could get into the weeds on this,
Yeah.
but one of the things was I felt like God was inviting me to take over the presidency of a long-standing civic association here. I didn't want to do that, but I felt the peace about it. And because of that role, I was coming across these opportunities that were for the community that nobody was taking advantage of, like home repairs, things like that. Because I wasn't making money, like we qualified. And what I realized is my neighbors are scared to use these programs. So what if I actually apply for them? And whether I get it or not, it's not even the point. Like I can tell them, hey, the process is easy or the process is hard. But if I do happen to qualify and get accepted, great, because this money is just getting like lost every
Yeah.
year.
It's use it or lose it for the government, so you might as well use it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was able to not just support my community and neighbors by being able to tell them, here's how the process goes, but then along the way, all of our windows get replaced.
That's awesome.
So this is what I'm saying is God provides in creative ways. And there were still those times where like, I can't tell you how it worked. I can't tell you why the money didn't run out. 2 of those years, by the way, my wife, actually starting in 2019, my wife felt a peace from God that caught me off guard to leave her job for what ended up being 2 years, because that brought us into the pandemic. So for 2 years, we did not have traditional paychecks.
That's crazy.
She is now getting a paycheck, but she's a teacher. So as you can imagine,
Yeah.
at a small private Christian school. And so, but we have not lost our house yet. You know what I mean? Like we
Yeah.
haven't missed a meal yet. God has continued to provide. Is it always easy? Nah, no.
It's crazy because during COVID, so I have my own video business, and so during COVID, I think it was like March 13th or whatever, 2020. My son is due May 20th around, and like March 13th, everything shuts down. And immediately clients start pulling, just saying, hey, we're gonna postpone this video, we're gonna postpone this video, we're gonna postpone this project. And I remember sitting back and counting. It was all the way out to like September. People were starting, and I was like, what in the world?
Yeah.
I was like, September. I was like, they're saying 2 weeks to slow the spread. Like what's going
This thing's not gonna last.
Yeah, September. I was like, you guys are crazy, but whatever. But I was counting the money, and I think it was like $28,000 in contracts I lost in 2 weeks. And I was just, I was like, this is terrible. You know, I have a kid coming. On top of that, we were transitioning out of a church that we had been at. My wife had taken another job at a new, smaller church. And so it just kind of felt like everything was coming together. And I remember I was coaching hockey at the time, very small, just like side little hustle, I guess. And the organization sent us a check and just said, hey, because of COVID, we're not able to do X, Y, and Z. And so we're thanking our coaches with this check. And I was like, holy cow. And then I was filming weddings when I was in college. That's kind of how I started. And like 2 weeks later, this client never paid for her video. And 2 weeks later, she emails me out of the blue, and she just says, hey, Peter, you know, I could give you all the excuses in the world as to why we didn't pay, but I had lost my job. There was a death in the family, but I always have felt bad about not paying. And so here you go. I want to make it right. So could you give me a link to pay? And that is, for me as a believer, I was like, wow, look at God taking care of me just in this random 8 years later, this girl's sending me, a couple $1,000, or this hockey program that I've been coaching. And so, I do. Yes, it's unfortunate, I think, sometimes when God brings you to those places where he's like, okay, are you going to trust me in this? And as Christians, as believers, it's like, well, I don't have any other choice. Like, what do you mean? Am I going to trust you in it? But the beautiful thing is that God is the provider. Like, he will always provide. And so I've seen it in my life, and it sounds like it's happened in your life and in your wife's life. And so that's just awesome to hear.
When it comes to this idea of trusting God as provider, I think that's part of the challenge is, man, there's been so much frustration, so many confused or even angry prayers at God, because I'm like, wait a minute, like, I remember you were doing this thing, so why aren't you doing this anymore? Or I thought we had a good thing worked out. Like, coming into 2025, that was our first year where suddenly something felt different financially. Before that, I never really looked at our bank account because it always just worked out somehow. I didn't have any stress or fear about it. But man, 2025, a lot of things changed for a lot of people, for sure. Somebody totaled our van in the middle of the night. Like, we had to take on a car payment for something that was already paid off. Right? So,
did you figure out who did it?
We did. We got it on video, and their front axle was destroyed, so they couldn't get away anyways. But they didn't feel responsible for it, even though they were speeding, ran a stop sign, and crashed into our parked van.
How do you not feel responsible for that?
Because they were young and just, living life. I don't know. I really don't know. I just left it alone. I was like, the officer will take care of this.
I think if you hit a parked car, it's usually always the person that does the hitting is responsible. Most times.
Usually. You would think so. But I mean, this here, right, even in this funny story, this is part of the reality of the human brain, right? Like, we can think objectively about a thing until we get to a situation where the objective element might impact us, and we'll shift into subjective without knowing it.
Right.
We'll shift into assumptions without knowing it, or we'll just totally change the narrative in our mind subconsciously. Like, our brains are amazing and they are frightening.
It's crazy. You got me thinking about a story of just sometimes you don't realize just what God's doing behind the scenes, and how your inconvenience could be answering the prayer of someone else. And so a little bit of a background, I think I mentioned this to you, is that I've done a ton of mission trips kind of all over the world, but especially along the Amazon River in Brazil. And I've been to very remote places. We fly down to Manaus and then get on this hammock boat and sleep on this boat for weeks. It's awesome. I think I've been there like 16, 17 times. But I want to say it was 2 years ago. We were on this new boat, and because of the Brazilian government, we had to have this form, which we didn't have, but they kept promising it was in the mail. But technically, we couldn't be out on the river because of it. And our captain somehow learned that they were doing a check for this paper when we were trying to get back to Manaus. We were going upstream. We had been on the boat for about 12 hours, and it was crazy because the captain was a dentist, a captain, and a doctor. And so he just kind of checked every box possible. But so he hears about this. And so he goes, oh, I know this little creek that we'll take to avoid this Navy ship that's pulling boats over. And so we start going up, and we're on this very slow creek, and, it's beautiful. It's very rural. And all of a sudden he just stops because he's like, we got to wait for them to leave. I don't want them to catch us and us pull back into the mouth of the river at the same time. So we just stopped, and we started doing these clinics there. And we got out, we walked around, started talking to the people. And this woman had some health issue. I forget what it was. I think it was something with her back. And she says, you know what? She goes, I pray to God every day that someone would stop, and no one ever stops. And so here we are with the medical equipment, with the people. We run a VBS for them, for their students. And apparently we were literally the first time that anybody had stopped in 5 years. And so how cool of a story is that you get to see it put together, and then all of a sudden this woman's saying, okay, you know what? I've been praying for you guys, and here you are. And the Lord's like, hey, I'm going to provide for this woman with a boat full of medical equipment, food supplies, people that are willing and able to serve. And for us, we're like, oh man, why are we going so slow here? Why are we so? And so I think that a lot of times we actually don't get to see that answered prayer for someone else, like how we are being used to answer a prayer for someone else. And so it was such a sweet reminder. And it was actually so, like, I don't want to say rewarding because that makes it sound like it's about me, but it was such a powerful reminder of who's actually written the story, who's going before us, and how, as to use your word, and I know that there's people who may not believe who are listening, but an ambassador of Christ. So Paul, in his language, he says, we are just passing through. We are aliens. We are not here. And so let us live to his glory and to his purpose. And so, I mean, it is such a humbling reminder when it's not about us. But it's crazy. And then even in Brazil, like down there along the Amazon, just some of the stories that you hear about God providing for these farmers and pastors that have nothing. Like there's a pastor and, we put on this pastors conference where they can come and be educated. And one of the pastors, it says, we were talking one time with him and, how many people are in your church? And he said 1. And we were like, 100? And he's like, no, just 1. But he's like, that's one person that gets to hear the word of God every week. And he's like, and Lord willing, we'll be able to grow, so it's just the people of Brazil, the people in these very rural areas who absolutely have nothing except for the joy of the Lord. And they're able to trust that the Lord will provide, and provision does. It looks completely different to them than it does to you or I, or very much anyone in the developed Western world.
Well, there's something that struck me as you were talking, you're sharing about this church, and there's one person, and then the comment of, Lord willing, it'll grow. And what I was struck by is, in my mind, this is the blunt question of, but why? Like, because the reality is like we do not think one is enough. And maybe we can get to the point where we will say, okay, no, but it has value, this one person. But deep down, we think that's a short-term thing. If it remains one forever, that's not good. I deal with this in my content creation, something very early on, and this started with the podcast. I knew all the ways I was supposed to operate a podcast, all the reasons that it's supposed to exist. You got to have the structure and the strategy so that you can build the audience, so that you can get the numbers up, so that you can get the monetization and the marketing and make a name for yourself and this, that, and the other. And that's fine. That's fine. People can pursue that. That's great. God wasn't going to let me pursue that. He made it very clear from the start that podcast did not exist for me to make a name for myself, or for me to get a bunch of listeners, or for me to get a lot of money. Those things have not happened. What he invited me to was what I said at the start, to cultivate authentic, accessible space. When I record, I tell the person I'm talking to, I was about to call him a guest, and the reason I didn't just now is because what I tell them is, this is not about making a podcast episode. This is not even about the podcast. Like, an episode can be a byproduct of that, but right now, this is an authentic conversation between us that we just happen to be recording.
Yeah.
And we're going to invite God into it, and I believe God can work through the conversation. If at the end, when I ask you, hey, are you okay with this being made an episode, you say no, then it won't be. And so I know that God's invited me for the purpose of my podcast, for the purpose of my books, for the purpose of the things that I create, to be about that space. And anything else is just bonus or extra. And the way that he pushed me in that, and again, this wasn't an audible conversation for anyone asking, but this deep sense within me, it was as though God was saying, what if I invite you to do this podcast and you do it for decades and then you die and only one person ever listened? Would you be willing to accept my invitation to do it? And as a good Christian, I'm like, yes, Lord. I didn't say it like that, but I was like, yeah, sure, God. Like, because, the 99, he leaves the 99 for the one. Like, I know the one is valuable. Fine. It's worth it. And I think most of myself probably believed that. I could see my reactions when I look at view count sometimes, and I get disappointed that there's still part of me that It doesn't believe it, right?
Yeah.
And I continue to contend with that. But then he pushed it further. And he said, okay, what if you exhaust yourself for decades? And not only does nobody listen to it, but everybody looks at you and thinks you're a fool, thinks you are being a bad husband, a bad father because you are not caring for your family. What if people actually say the stuff you're saying is nonsense? What if you die looking like a failure and a fool? And then you get to eternity and I say, well done, my good and faithful servant. Would you accept my invitation? Right? It's like what you were saying earlier, is sometimes we could be used for something and not see the fruit of it. That scenario is not as easy to stomach.
Yeah.
A lifetime of looking like a foolish failure and then never seeing the fruit. Who would sign up for that? Nobody. Unless, well, one big thing, but the only way you could ever come close is if you are really locking into a different understanding of what is the purpose of life.
Yeah.
What are we created for? And who is this God that we're serving? Because what you and I have touched on in these stories is we always have this framework, this understanding of what life is and who we are and what that means. And our stories have touched into these invitations to consider, could life be bigger than my understanding?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I guess, a lot of things just kind of popped into my mind, but when I think about Paul, so I actually, middle of last year, I did a Footsteps of Paul tour. I filmed it. And so I went to, where did I go? We started in Corinth, Philippi, Berea, Thessaloniki, Corinth, Athens, Ephesus, and then we stopped at Patmos and went to Rome. And so much, like going back, because I get to edit it, I get to listen to it quite a bit. And I've just, this pastor, Lon Solomon, he was teaching on it, but there was so much to Paul's ministry and to Paul's mission that I didn't fully grasp until I was actually being there. It's like, okay, well, why did he choose these areas? And it's because that's where the roads were. And Paul, Paul kind of gets kicked out of everywhere he goes, which you don't realize. It's like, wow, Paul, he's such this huge.
Sometimes like destructively.
Yeah. Like he gets run out of Thessaloniki. He gets jailed in Philippi. He gets basically run out of Berea. Athens, they kind of are like, okay, we kind of believe you. We're not sure. And then he's like, all right, I'm going to head over to Ephesus.
The Apostle Paul is a great example of this, but I think particularly we have to challenge our understanding of who we even think he is. Because the way we talk about him most of the time is like a hero of the faith. Oh, man, the Apostle Paul, like, oh, he did so many great things. I could never do that. But I mean, I'm glad he did. And he was really good at this and that and the other. You know what Paul would tell you? He told us in Scripture, he's like, I was the chief of sinners. Yeah. I still am the chief. In other words, I do not understand what I do because what I want to do, I don't do, and what I hate to do, I do.
Yeah.
I did not come to you with eloquent words, but with fear and trepidation, right? The Apostle Paul knew what it was to be successful. He was the most successful guy in his sphere. Hebrew of Hebrew, Pharisee of Pharisees, under the law blameless. Like he was the man. And then he was invited to a life where he experienced what you described, the opposite, where he was run out of towns, where he was called names, even in places where he was respected. There's one story where he had helped start a church. He left. A guy named Apollos came in, started continuing to teach them, and then people started saying, "Who? I don't follow Paul. I follow Apollos."
Yeah.
And Paul's like, "No, I'm not the point. Who is Paul? Who is Apollos? I plant a seed. Apollos waters it. God makes it grow. This is about God." And so we have to understand that Paul wasn't a super Christian. Like who he was someone who had a real encounter with Jesus that not just utterly changed his life, but his understanding of life. Like what I described for me in middle school was like, I thought life was about, you go to school, you get a job, you do this, that, and other, and something shifted to where I'm like, my life is going to be about loving God and loving others. I don't even know what that means, but I'm going to do it. So he had this shift in his understanding of life, and then he had a willingness to live into that unknown, uncertainty, foolishness, because You were talking about, what led Paul to all these different places, and roads were a big part of it. But there is another piece that ties back to your story on the river, because y'all had your plans. You knew exactly what you needed to do, and they were good plans. And suddenly you got detoured.
Yeah.
This happened to the Apostle Paul.
Yeah,
he had this
Macedonia.
whole missionary journey planned. And then he had this, it says the Spirit multiple times tried to stop him. And they kept pushing against it, like, get out of the way. They didn't say get out of the way of the Spirit. They probably blamed something else. That's not the Spirit, because we know what we're supposed to do. This is a good missionary journey. And then he has this dream of this man from Macedonia, the complete opposite direction, a place he hadn't vetted. So he wouldn't have known anything about it. And this man from Macedonia is like, we need you to come. And he gets this peace, right? Even though he has to throw all of his plans away and go into an unknown situation, he just knows that's where I'm supposed to go. And that's most of what we read.
He has to get on a boat and cross the Mediterranean. It's not always going to be these big, extraordinary events following Christ, but it's always going to be an invitation, and he's always going to allow you to be used by him for his glory. And there, just like you said earlier about eternally, there's a greater story being written. And so, that's just really cool to think about.
When we see him really, really getting it is late in Acts, and there's this spiritual word from the Spirit that is given to a number of people. Everyone's hearing the same thing. If Paul goes to Jerusalem, he is going to be persecuted. And they thought through it and likely killed, probably. So they're getting this spiritual word. All of them are getting it. So it's definitely from God. Only one person understood it in a specific way. Everybody else, they interpreted it this way. If Paul goes to Jerusalem, he's going to be killed. Or he's going to be persecuted. He's going to be killed. Therefore, he's not supposed to go to Jerusalem. Because what is supposed to be is that Paul is able to thrive in his ministry. What needs to happen is he needs to stay alive, right? Maybe they'll accept persecution because he's been dealing with that, but like death is off the table. So he cannot go. Too many people have died. He cannot go. So they start trying to hold him back. Luke says, we were trying to convince him, and then when it was clear he was being stubborn and wasn't going to change his mind, we conceded and wept. The Apostle Paul, however, heard that same word. If I go to Jerusalem, I will be persecuted. But whereas everyone else was coming to it from this vantage point of he needs to stay alive, we love him, we want him to thrive, we want his ministry to thrive, he came with a different understanding. He still wanted to be alive, right? He prayed to God to take away a thorn in the flesh. If you're praying about a thorn in the flesh, you probably don't want to be murdered.
Exactly. Yeah.
So he's still human. But his grounding was, no. God already told me at the start of all this, when I got knocked off my feet and went blind, Jesus told the guy whose house he was staying at, Paul's going to suffer. I can't remember how it's worded, but he's going to experience sufferings in order to come to know who I am. So Paul already knew suffering was going to be a part of the story. And he had already gotten this sense of like, life wasn't the purpose of this. And if he died, he'd get to be with Jesus. And so when he heard that word, if you go to Jerusalem, you are going to be persecuted. He's like, all right, like I've already been given the heads up on this, so I know this is where I'm supposed to go. Same word, completely opposite understandings of it, all based on what are we grounding our interpretation off of? Our desires, our hopes, our aspirations, our logic, or this incomprehensible God who is not bound by our rules. This one is understandably hard, which again is why it's so good for us that Jesus said, I'm sending a helper and an advocate, because we can't grasp this on our own. But if we refuse to live into this because of fear, then we're going to end up, if those people had convinced Paul, they would have actually, out of love, convinced him to do the opposite of God's will. And, we could probably break down if he didn't go to Jerusalem and then eventually to Rome, a lot of things would be different for a lot of people. But because Paul was willing to put himself aside and to love God and love others by saying, I'm willing to accept this word, and this fits in line with what God has said. As a result of that, you and I are having this conversation, among other things. Yeah. And so, I think we want things to be a certain way. We think we need them to be a certain way. And God's like, but I know better than that. And I know what you need. And you actually don't need that. I could do supernatural stuff. So are you willing to trust me?
It's very well said. If you were to talk to someone who wasn't a believer, and they're like, well, I've never seen God, or I've never witnessed the goodness of God. Life is hard. I mean, absolutely. And what would you say to them? Like, where do you tell them to start?
Yeah. I mean, first I would want to say, hey, your concerns are valid. Your perception is valid. I think that's a problem sometimes that Christians have, is we're not willing to accept the reality that this is confusing and hard.
Yeah.
Again, God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. So why would we be surprised if our thoughts don't match up with what we're told God is?
Right.
So I would also want to apologize. Like if part of their context is a result of unhealthy church environments, like I would want to apologize because many of us who that we represent God in Christ have not been a good. This is where the tiredness is creeping in, and I finished my coffee.
Oh no,
and it's not doing the trick. Many of us who claim to represent God and Christ are doing a bad job at being ambassadors. We are saying this is what God would say, but it is actually not. And so I would want to set that framework first. It is valid and justified to have questions, to have concerns, and to be frustrated. What I would then say to encourage them is the fact that you're even asking the question means that there's a part of you that is open to the idea that there could be a loving God. And so what could it look like to just take a little lean into that direction, a little toe nudge forward, a little step, to live in some way as though that's true? Like, what's a small decision you can make that is based not off of what you want or you think, but based off of the possibility of a loving God that wants to connect? And then just make that small step. And then pay attention to what's happening around you. We can really talk about these grandiose things within Christianity and unintentionally miss the little things, the small ways that God works and moves, but also the small ways that we can move towards him that are actually meaningful. We talk about the leaps of faith, and those are great, but the toe nudge of faith is also good, right?
Yeah.
And so,
What do you
that
mean
would be
by
a piece
toe
of
nudge
it, is a
of faith?
willingness.
What would you mean by toe nudge of faith? What would
So-
be like an example?
Yeah. Here's what it looks like in my life a lot of times. There are some times where I'm done. I'm tired. Like, I've got nothing left. I'm mad at God. Like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to have faith anymore. And yet I'm like, I have this deep willingness inside to not give up. And so, like, my movement forward is just like, all right, I'm going to say a little prayer today, or I'm going to forego this little thing. Like, I'm talking like stuff that you would never write a book about, because it's inconsequential, but it is. The story makes me think of is there's a passage in scripture where Jesus is at the temple and two people are giving gifts. One person gives this large gift and makes a big deal out of it, and he's wealthy. And then there's this woman who has like 2 mites, two coins, and she gives, and he's like, that was the gift right there. And, people could be looking and be like, she gave like nothing. You can't get in. You can't even buy anything with that. But Jesus, like, she gave everything she had.
Yeah.
She gave the little she had left that she could have saved for herself. And it's like, sometimes the toe nudge is like the 2 little coins, the 2 mites, 2 pennies worth. They don't even make pennies anymore. They're beyond worthless, but it's still something coming from a place where instead of choosing to give nothing, you gave something. And that expanse between that is bigger than we realize.
Yep.
Sometimes it's bigger than the big gift. I would encourage people around that, because the good news in that is you have the capacity for that today, even if you feel like you have no capacity. But then the second thing I would say is, as you were doing that, this is not designed to be an isolated experience, an isolated event. Scripture makes it clear we're not called to operate in silos. We're not even called to operate just us and God. Scripture is clear that we are called to community. And so I would invite you to consider who could be a safe connecting point to begin to process these things with, to ask these questions. It doesn't have to be a church. It doesn't even have to be a Christian. But isolation is one of the biggest traps that we as people fall into, but as Christians, we do that as well. Even as we're connected to people, we isolate ourselves. And that would be my second invitation. If you really want to figure out who God is, he is a God of community. And so lean into connecting with others.
I think that's so well said, and I think that especially for Christians, I think it's so much. Well, I mean for everybody, but I think that Christians have really we've sat back in this isolation. Oh, I'm going to work from home. Oh, I'm going to watch church online. Oh, I can order, and then we look out, and not to like rag on homeschool or anything like that, but that's the example that I see. It's like, well, how did the public schools get like that? And I think it's because, okay, well, all the Christians left. Like, who's bringing the gospel there? Who's bringing the light there? Christians aren't out in the community anymore. They're not spreading the gospel. The gospel's only being spread at churches, and it's almost kind of like it's an echo chamber, especially here in America. And so the one encouragement that I actually want to give for Christians is like, get out there, don't sit back. And I think that one thing that I really like about our conversation and just kind of what you're calling is that you are called to love your neighbor. And this is a society and it's a culture where we don't really know our neighbors anymore. We don't really know our community. Yeah. We don't really know the people that are surrounding us. And so, I guess the last question I would have for you is, for you personally, for just Christians in general, what does loving a neighbor actually look like, or being involved in a community? Because I kind of think of Romans 12, Romans 13. But for someone who is a follower of Christ, how can they be a Christian in the public square?
I think the first thing we got to acknowledge is we don't actually understand love, or worse, we misrepresent love often. Mm-hmm. In my community, there's been a lot of struggles over the decades, a lot of challenges, and it's also densely populated. And so there's a lot of neighbors, but there's a lot of new neighbors who don't want to interact with a lot of the neighbors. And so there's this difference between front porch culture and back porch culture. Neither of them is like, I'm not saying one is good and one's bad, but front porch culture is, I'm on my front porch, which means my neighbors are going to see me, I'm going to see them. We're either going to have to interact, or I'm going to be like clearly ignoring them. But there actually may be more opportunities for conversation, being visible. Back porch culture is, your home is less a part of the community and more your sanctuary within a community. And that's fine. Like, sometimes we need to rest, but you've got your 6-foot privacy fence. Like, there are expectations. Nobody comes into your yard. So you're going to be able to keep to yourself. I learned, being in this community, that front porch culture used to be a valued thing, that's what I needed to do. Like, I needed to actually try to be on my porch as much as I'm able, so that I can actually have an opportunity to meet neighbors. So am I positioning myself, or am I avoiding the spaces? I see somebody on the sidewalk and I go across the street because I don't want to interact with them. Maybe I don't know how to interact with them. But can I be honest that I am making that conscious choice to position myself away from a neighbor? Yeah. And then I think posture I'm going to separate that out. When we do these things, we know our purpose is to be a conduit of love. We're positioning ourselves to do so. But posture, this is what Jesus says. If you really want to love, you need to posture yourself as a servant, not as the expert, not as the guy fixing it, not as the savior. He's the savior. As a servant, he washed his disciples' feet to demonstrate this, and they did not know what to do with this. They even called him out on it. But he's like, this is when you actually, a posture of love is making yourself willing to look like a fool, to not be appreciated, to not be respected, or to get no acclaim. No one knows you even did anything loving, right? So purpose, positioning, and posture. If we really want to love our neighbors, we've got to be honest about those things. But before we even start that, we got to be honest about how we understand love. And then just start doing it. Like, don't try to take the toe nudge. All you give is a wave to a neighbor, but that was something, right? Like, that's fine. Like, start small. Don't think you got to start a nonprofit to have value. Man, you learn somebody's name, you might change their life, because they're like, nobody has ever learned my name, right? Small things can make a big difference.
I love that. Well, Paul, thanks so much for joining us. And is there anything else you'd like to close with, or where can we find you? I know you said your podcast is on a little bit of a hiatus when we previously spoke, but you also have books. You have a few other things, or?
Yeah, lots of books. I've been self-publishing like a madman.
Nice.
But I think this is what I would really want to point people to. Like, why I'm here, as I shared at the beginning, is to cultivate authentic, accessible space to process who God is, who he's made us to be and what that means for life, or just to process life in general if someone's not a believer. And that space can take the form of listening to the podcast or being a part of the podcast. So, we're going to connect. I'm going to get you on.
Nice.
Reading the books. If you don't even want to be around people, like, you can get a PDF. I've got free PDFs. I don't even care. This is not about money. I just want people to know you don't have to be alone. If you are wrestling with things, I want to find a way to create space, whether directly or indirectly. And so that's the one thing I want to say, and I want to close with this other piece. If anybody hears any of this and starts saying of me the same thing I was talking about, the other Paul, the Apostle Paul, he's doing such great things. Man, he's so amazing. I could never do anything like what he's doing. Man, going without a paycheck. Whew.
Yeah.
I want you to know the same thing I said about that other Paul. It is not me. Today, I had a horrible night last night. I am not happy right. I'm struggling today. But I feel a lot of life right now, right? Because all I brought to the table was the willingness to toe nudge. Today was a toe nudge. I'm smiling though now because this has been life-giving.
Awesome.
Sometimes the toe nudge feels like it's not going to get us anywhere, but it can do so much more. And so I want to encourage the person listening, like, anything of value you see in me is actually because of God, and the same God who is with me is with you. The same Spirit that equips me to do things I couldn't is with you. And it's a gift that if you want to accept it, boom, like, let's do it. But I want you to know you have so much more value than you realize. You are made in the image of God.
Yep.
And that is just so much bigger than you realize.
I love it. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Paul. And I'd love to hop on your podcast whenever, and hopefully I'll have you back sometime. But thanks for coming on.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
We know at least it'll be a good story.